you, but I'll just quickly kick us off, and I'll start with you, Matthew. You've launched this review. What are you hoping to sort of gain from it? Because everyone's been saying we all know what the problems are. I'm assuming that the DFT know what the problems are. I'm assuming Jesse Norman drives on local roads and sees the potholes.
Yeah.
So what are you hoping to achieve from it? Because it just sounds like they know, but the government's decided to concentrate on the bigger roads.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. It's not about articulating again what the problem is. I think what we're trying to do is start to get some thinking about the solutions, and there will be options available. And I talked about this, in terms of how radical we could go with this, or whether we could look at it as something maybe more politically acceptable, or it could be an incremental change. But I think that the fundamental issue is that we need a new funding regime from local roads. The money isn't just there anymore. We've articulated that through all the presentations, particularly in the revenue perspective. So we've got to look at it in a different way. And I think we have to bite this bullet to say, the user pays, like it or not. The road network is a utility. And until we get people into that mindset, I think, we're not really going to move forward. So I think that's where I'm looking. And then, of course, the governance as well. So I think all of us have touched on the fact there are too many highway authorities. That can be quite controversial politically. But, the thing about CIHT is, we've got no particular industry axe to grind. We're here to represent all industry from a very independent perspective. So we can raise these issues in an independent way. Now, whether government choose to follow them or not, we don't know, but at least we can provide some information to put into that debate.
Martin, do you think it requires a complete restructuring? So we've got this major roads network kind of giving a little bridge between the bigger roads and the little roads. Do you think in the end you've got to perhaps even bring some of these roads out of council control, or bring them under Highways England? Some big kind of restructuring.
I love restructuring. In some ways it's back to the future, because actually there have been a lot of roads that have moved from Highways England to local authorities if you look back. So the traffic's been in that direction rather than the other way around. I do think, I reflect a lot on what's just been said. There is obviously a need for the strategic roads network. I get the focus on that. It's where a lot of the HGVs are. It's a lot of the sort of economic pulse of the country. But we neglect at our peril, and I was having this debate actually just sitting there with Jim O'Neill last night from Highways England, who was defending, as one would expect him to, the massively disproportionate spend on the strategic roads network, as opposed to the 80-90% of the roads that are actually the local roads. So I do think we need, first of all, a focus on the hierarchy that looks at the major roads network. They are key roads that link into the strategic roads network. They are disproportionately underfunded today. And then we also need to have money to support our local roads. So I go back to the fact that we do need to get more money in the system, in my view. We can spend what we've got better. I get that entirely. But I think there needs to be an uplift in money. Some of it could come from reprioritising the money on the strategic roads network. Even a minor movement of some of the large amount of money on the strategic roads network would make a massive difference on the local roads. I mean, tiny percentage changes there give massive uplifts in the local roads. But I also think that the LGA's idea of looking at, let's say a penny, per litre on the price of petrol, would inject a phenomenal amount of money in on an ongoing basis. And you see the price of petrol go up and down by 5, 10 pence, and actually these days people don't really complain that much. And if you explain to them a penny was actually going to make a long-term difference to the state of the roads, I think they'd accept that.
We got any questions from the audience? No, that's fine. Well, just very quickly then we can come. Oh, brilliant, yes. Can we get a microphone over to this chap? We've got a microphone. Do you mind? How good are you at shouting? Yeah. Do you know what? Once I'm really sorry, there is a microphone there now. Go for it.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Can we switch on his mic? Oh, hello. Yes, I'm David Thresh from Preparators, a small freelance consultancy, which means be prepared for climate change. Now, I was here yesterday and listening to the speakers this morning, which was very interesting. But bearing in mind the Storm Desmond destruction in 2015, which took out 26 bridges on one storm, what is the authorities and all of the lead consultancies doing about preparing for climate change and building in resilience into the infrastructure?
Yeah, I think weather's really important. Nigel, do you want to take that?
Just as a starter and to bridge back to the previous question, it's interesting, I think, the debates that are starting to play out, particularly in my own area, in a combined authority area, about strategic road network, major road network. We will have our own key route network within the combined authority area. And I think if we get that right, that discussion about which are critical routes for business, which are critical routes for communities, which are the ones that we do need to invest in and protect and make as resilient as possible, so that we do have a network that is fit for the sort of challenges that climate change is going to put in front of us. But I do think it needs a broader take and a broader piece of thinking. I don't think any one local authority can do that in its own right. It does have to understand its position within its wider network of the strategic road network, major road network, and work with the other agencies around that. And from an adept point of view, we promote the HIRAM as a piece of software that at least helps local authorities think about where some of the challenges are within their networks in terms of climate change, and start to think about, in an ideal world, we make long-term investments about when we can make sensible investments in our network that will bring some of that resilience in the long term. But I think we've got, as authorities, much more work to do around getting that right, because we only get one chance at some of the big capital investments we make.
Martin?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And as I was saying in my last slide, look, I think as we build all these new houses the government's talking about for the future and all the new roads that service them, we absolutely have to be thinking about climate change and the effect that's going to have. We should be designing that in right from the start rather than trying to retrofit it. My big worry, quite frankly, is the existing infrastructure we've got. Because with the limited pots of money that local authorities have got, and it plays absolutely into some of, I think, particularly John's comments, the political pressure locally on politicians from residents is to fix the roads, candidly. It's the pothole outside their house that gets the political priority. And actually, the bridge that, quite frankly, may not be structurally perfect but looks okay, will politically be a lower priority. And that's a really big worry for me, because at some point, I do not want to see an Italian-style catastrophe in this country, but we have to recognize, we're going to have to invest back into those structures. And politically, it's difficult to justify fixing something that looks okay, when people have got potholes outside their houses.
John?
So, yeah, I think just on that point, again, it's important that we deal with facts. And Treasury and Cabinet Office concluded that the cost of Storm Desmond, Eva and Frank over that winter of 2015, that cost in direct infrastructure costs, £1.6 billion. You saw nearly £200 million worth of damage relief from DFT alone go to Cumbria and to West Yorkshire. When you look at the impact of that, that is something that is increasing in terms of its frequency. The Met Office recently stated that you will have a repeat event in terms of severe weather, which could be severe snow, severe heat, as we've just had, severe wet, plague of locusts, who knows. But that will be 30% more intense and 30% more common. The important point, and something close to dear to Martin, is the fact that these bridges have evolved over time in terms of their use. One particular historic stone masonry arch in Calderdale was notable in that it was part of the network, but it was not our bridge. DFT still funded it, the relevance being it carried 35 bits of utility asset over it, including, and again within a professional audience I share this, but it is still featuring in conversations that I'm having with DFT and Cabinet Office. It featured the main fibre optic for 25% of the UK banking sector into a data centre. Now, that was what prompted DFT to act expeditiously, and that is what is maintaining some work that I am leading on with DFT, looking at how we make a more resilient network. And we are using the 2015 flooding as a bit of a benchmark, as a bit of a fixed point in time to say, how do future events and previous events compare with that? So it is very much at the thinking of DFT, but it does require a sector response across CIHT, ADEPT and TAG, because we do not know how these structures were put together. It is far more complex than a motorway network that was built 50, 60 years ago on virgin ground. It's extremely complex. And that's one of the key things that ministers need to understand. We're more vulnerable than we perhaps think we are.
Guys, thank you very much. It feels like we could talk a lot more about this, but I think we'd better wind it up. So just quickly to thank Ringway, who sponsored this session, and please put your hands together for our fantastic panel.